My wife's last words were, "Michael isn't who you think he is." I held her hand, feeling it grow cold in mine, and I smiled sadly, thinking the morphine had finally made her paranoid. Susan had always been protective, maybe even overprotective of me since her diagnosis. But this, suggesting our son, our only child, was somehow deceptive, that had to be the drugs talking. 3 days later, I buried her in the cemetery overlooking English Bay in Vancouver, the city where we'd built our life together. The October rain fell steadily, and Michael stood beside me, his arm around my shoulders, whispering reassurances that I'd be okay, that he'd take care of everything. He'd flown in from Toronto the moment I called. He'd arranged the service, handled the paperwork, dealt with the funeral home. What kind of son does that? A good one, I thought. Susan had been wrong. She had to have been wrong. The house felt impossibly empty after the funeral. 42 years of marriage, and suddenly I was sorting through closets alone, finding her reading glasses tucked between cookbooks, her favorite cardigan still draped over the chair where she'd sat every morning with her tea. The grief was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest until I could barely breathe. Michael called every day that first week, checking in, making sure I was eating, suggesting I see someone professional to talk to. On day 8, he showed up at my door with groceries and a proposition that caught me completely off guard. "Dad, I know this is going to sound crazy right now, but hear me out," he said, setting bags of food on the kitchen counter. He was wearing one of his expensive suits, probably had a client meeting later. "I've been thinking about you, alone in this house, and I had an idea. What if you got away for a while? Just to clear your head, get some distance from all this." I must have looked at him like he'd grown a second head because he held up his hands defensively. I know. It seems insensitive so soon after Mom. But actually, I think she'd want this. Remember how she always talked about taking an Alaskan cruise? How she clipped those articles about the northern lights and glaciers? He was right. Susan had dreamed of Alaska for years. We'd planned to go for our 40th anniversary, but then came the diagnosis, and cruise ships became hospital rooms instead. The brochures she'd collected were still in a drawer in her desk. "Michael, I appreciate the thought, but I can't just leave right now. There's your mother's estate to settle. The house needs work, and honestly, I don't think I could enjoy something like that alone." "That's the thing, Dad. You wouldn't be alone. I've already looked into it. There's a cruise leaving in 3 weeks, Victoria to Alaska, 14 days. I want to pay for it. My treat. Think of it as a memorial trip for Mom, doing what she never got to do." 3 weeks seemed impossibly soon. But as I looked around the kitchen, at the chair where Susan would never sit again, at the calendar still showing appointments she'd never keep, part of me desperately wanted to escape this house full of ghosts. Michael must have seen something shift in my expression because he pressed on. "I've got the brochure right here. Look, they have whale watching, glacier tours, stops in Juneau, and Ketchikan. Remember how Mom used to talk about seeing Mendenhall Glacier? Dad, she'd want you to see it for her, to live for her." The brochure was glossy and professional, showing massive ships and breathtaking vistas. The price tag, even for an inside cabin, made me wince. "Michael, this is too expensive. I can't let you spend this kind of money on me." "Dad, I'm a financial advisor. I do okay. And you and Mom helped me through university, bought me my first car, supported me when I was starting out. Let me do this for you, please." There was something in his eyes, an earnestness, that reminded me of when he was young, begging for a puppy or permission to go camping with friends. How could I say no to my son wanting to honor his mother's memory? Susan's voice echoed in my head, that final warning, but I pushed it away. Grief makes people say strange things. The morphine makes them see threats where none exist. "Okay," I heard myself saying. "Okay, let's do it." Michael's face lit up, and he pulled me into a hug that felt genuine, warm. "You won't regret this, Dad. I promise. It's exactly what you need right now." The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparations. Michael handled everything, booking the cruise, arranging transportation to Victoria, even shopping with me for appropriate clothing for the variable Alaskan weather. He was attentive, calling multiple times a day, helping me sort through Susan's belongings when the task became too overwhelming. Every action seemed to prove that Susan's final words had been nothing more than drug-induced confusion. My son was devoted, caring, supportive. Everything a grieving father could ask for. 2 days before departure, Michael showed up at the house with a folder full of paperwork. Just some administrative stuff for the cruise, he explained, setting it on the dining table. Nothing major, but they require certain forms before boarding. Medical waivers, activity releases, that kind of thing. I figured we could go through it together, make sure everything's in order. I'd never been on a cruise before, had no idea what to expect in terms of paperwork. Michael walked me through each form with patience, explaining what each one meant. There was a standard liability waiver for shore excursions, a medical questionnaire about my health status, emergency contact information. It all seemed routine, bureaucratic. Then he pulled out a longer document, maybe 8 or 10 pages, with dense text and multiple signature lines. "This one's a bit more involved," he said, his tone casual. "It's a comprehensive release form. Basically, it covers everything from medical emergencies to financial responsibility if something happens during the trip. The cruise line is pretty thorough about protecting themselves legally." I started to read through it, but the legal language was dense, full of clauses and subclauses that seemed to reference other sections. My eyes were tired, still adjusting to reading without Susan there to help when I got confused by complicated text. She'd always been the detail-oriented one, the one who read instruction manuals and insurance policies. I'd relied on her for that. "It's pretty standard stuff, Dad," Michael assured me, pointing to a highlighted section. "See, this just says you acknowledge the risks of shore excursions. This part covers medical treatment authorization if you're incapacitated, and this section deals with payment responsibility. Nothing out of the ordinary for cruise documentation." "Medical treatment authorization?" I asked, trying to focus on the words that seemed to swim on the page. "Just so that if, God forbid, something happens and you're unconscious, they can treat you without having to track down next of kin for permission. It's for your protection, really. You don't want to be bleeding out while they're trying to call me in Toronto." That made sense, I supposed. I flipped to the signature page, saw multiple lines marked with sticky tabs. Why so many signatures? Each section requires separate acknowledgement. Insurance purposes. You know how paranoid companies are these days about liability. Michael handed me a pen, pointing to the first line. "Just sign where the tabs are, and we're done. Then we can celebrate." I brought your favorite scotch. Something made me hesitate. Pen hovering over the first line. Maybe it was Susan's voice in my head, or maybe it was just the instinct that comes from 67 years of life experience. "Michael, I'd like to read through this more carefully first. Maybe have my lawyer look at it." For just a second, something flickered across my son's face. Annoyance? Frustration? But then he smiled. That same warm smile from childhood. "Of course, Dad. That's totally fine. Though, I should mention, the cruise leaves in 2 days, and the cruise line said they need all documentation 48 hours in advance. If we miss that deadline, they might not let you board. These liability forms are pretty strict about timing." 48 hours? But that's... I know. I should have brought these earlier. That's on me. I've just been so busy with work and trying to help you prepare, it slipped my mind until the cruise line emailed me this morning saying they needed everything immediately. But if you want to postpone the trip, we can. I can try to get a refund, though I think it's outside the cancellation window. I looked at the folder, at my son's earnest expression, at the calendar on the wall showing my departure date circled in red. Susan had wanted this trip so badly. Was I really going to let legal paranoia prevent me from honoring her memory? I thought about her final words again, that warning about Michael, and felt a flash of anger at myself for even entertaining such a terrible thought about my own son. He'd done nothing but support me through the worst period of my life. "You're right," I said, taking the pen. "I'm being silly. If this is standard cruise documentation, there's no point complicating things." Michael's smile broadened. "That's the spirit, Dad. Just sign where the tabs are. This is going to be an amazing trip. Exactly what Mom would have wanted." I signed the first line, then the second, working my way through the document. Michael made small talk as I signed, telling me about the shore excursions he'd pre-booked for me, the special dining options available, the possibility of seeing the aurora borealis if we were lucky with timing and weather. By the time I reached the last signature line, I'd almost forgotten my initial hesitation. I was already mentally preparing for the trip, imagining glacier landscapes and whale sightings that Susan would never see but that I could experience in her honor. "All done," Michael said, gathering up the papers quickly and sliding them back into the folder. "Perfect. I'll get these submitted to the cruise line tonight. Now, how about that scotch?" We spent the evening reminiscing about Susan, sharing memories and tears and occasional laughter. Michael was the perfect grieving son, and I went to bed that night feeling grateful for his presence in my life, ashamed that I'd ever doubted him even for a moment. Susan's warning seemed like nothing more than the confused ramblings of a dying mind, as tragic as it was meaningless. The morning of departure, Michael drove me to the ferry terminal in Victoria. He'd arranged everything meticulously. A porter took my luggage, someone from the cruise line met us at check-in, and within an hour I was standing on the deck of what felt like a floating city, watching the British Columbia coastline recede into the distance. Michael had booked me a balcony cabin, despite my protests about the expense. He'd even arranged for a bottle of champagne to be waiting in my room, with a note that read, "To Mom's adventure. Love, Michael." I stood on my balcony as we sailed up the inside passage, feeling the first genuine peace I'd experienced since Susan's death. Maybe this was exactly what I needed. Maybe my son had been right all along. The first 3 days of the cruise were magnificent. We passed through channels lined with ancient forests, saw eagles soaring overhead, stopped in a small Alaskan town where I bought a carved wooden bear that Susan would have loved. The other passengers were friendly, mostly retired couples or solo travelers like myself. I ate too much at the buffets, attended a lecture on glacier formation, even tried the ship's rock-climbing wall at the encouragement of a grandmother from Ontario who had to be at least 75. On the 4th day, we docked in Juneau. I'd signed up for a shore excursion to Mendenhall Glacier, the trip Susan had most wanted to take. Standing in front of that massive river of ice, feeling the cold radiating from its blue depths, I felt simultaneously awed and heartbroken that she wasn't there to see it. I was taking photos to show to no one, collecting memories that would live only in my own head. I was still in this melancholy state when I returned to the ship that evening. The cruise director, an energetic woman in her 40s named Patricia, stopped me as I crossed the gangway. "Mr. Morrison? William Morrison?" "That's me," I said, a bit surprised to be singled out. "Is something wrong?" "Not wrong exactly," she said, her professional smile not quite reaching her eyes. "But I wonder if you have a moment to chat, privately?" My first thought was that something had happened to Michael, that there'd been an accident or emergency. Patricia must have seen the panic on my face because she quickly added, "Oh, no, nothing like that. It's just a small administrative matter. Would you mind coming to my office?" Her office was compact but well organized, tucked away on a deck I hadn't yet explored. She closed the door and gestured to a chair, her demeanor shifting from cheerful cruise director to something more serious. "Mr. Morrison, I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me. When you booked this cruise, did you sign any documents besides the standard passenger agreement?" "I'm not sure I understand," I said, confused by the question. "My son handled most of the booking. There was some paperwork before I left, liability forms and such." "Did any of those forms relate to your finances, your property, anything beyond standard cruise documentation?" A cold sensation started spreading through my chest. "What is this about?" Patricia pulled out a folder, similar to the one Michael had brought to my house. "Mr. Morrison, this morning I received a call from our legal department. Apparently, there's been some unusual activity related to your passenger account. Someone attempted to charge a significant amount to your credit card, far beyond what would be normal cruise expenses. When our fraud department investigated, they found that attached to your passenger file was a power of attorney document." "A power of attorney? That's impossible. I never signed any such thing." She opened the folder and turned it toward me. I recognized my signature immediately, replicated multiple times across multiple pages. But the text above those signatures wasn't about liability waivers or medical treatment. It was dense legal language granting Michael complete authority over my finances, my property, my healthcare decisions. Durable power of attorney, it was called. Effective, immediately, and irrevocable, except under specific legal circumstances. This can't be right, I whispered, my hands starting to shake. Michael told me these were cruise forms. He said it was standard documentation. Patricia's expression was gentle but firm. Mr. Morrison, I've been a cruise director for 15 years. I've never seen anything like this. A power of attorney has nothing to do with cruise operations, and the fact that someone tried to use it to access your funds while you're at sea, that's a massive red flag. The room felt like it was tilting, the gentle rock of the ship suddenly nauseating. What kind of charge are we talking about? They attempted to wire $50,000 from your account to a numbered company in Toronto. Our fraud detection caught it because it was so unusual and because the authorization came from someone other than the account holder. But Mr. Morrison, if we hadn't caught it, that money would be gone. And with this power of attorney in place, it would have been completely legal. $50,000. I thought about my house in Vancouver, purchased 40 years ago and now worth over $2 million in the current market. I thought about Susan's life insurance policy, the payout I'd just received. I thought about my pension, my investments, my savings, all of it potentially accessible to someone with power of attorney. All of it potentially accessible to my son. Michael isn't who you think he is. Susan's last words crashed over me like a wave, suddenly crystal clear instead of morphine-induced paranoia. She'd known. Somehow, she'd known what he was planning. And she'd tried to warn me. I need to make some calls, I said, standing up so quickly the chair nearly tipped over. I need to contact my lawyer, my bank. I need to... Mr. Morrison, please sit down. Patricia's voice was calm but commanding. I understand you're panicking, but we need to handle this carefully and correctly. First, we've already frozen any attempts to access your accounts through this power of attorney. Our legal team has flagged it as potentially fraudulent. Second, we're currently 3 days from the nearest port where you could disembark, and even then, you'd need to arrange flights and travel. Third, and most importantly, acting rashly could tip off whoever is behind this that we're onto them. It's my son, I said, the words tasting like poison. My son is behind this. We don't know that for certain yet, Patricia said, though her tone suggested she had her suspicions. What we do know is that someone forged or deceived you into signing legal documents that grant them control over your assets. We also know that someone is actively attempting to access those assets right now. The question is, what do you want to do about it? What did I want to do? I wanted to call Michael and scream at him, demand answers, ask how he could betray me like this when his mother's body was barely cold in the ground. But even through my shock and rage, a small voice of reason reminded me that Patricia was right. If I confronted him now, he'd know I'd discovered his scheme, and he might find other ways to access my money or cover his tracks. What do you suggest? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I suggest we contact the authorities when we reach port in 3 days. In the meantime, I'm going to connect you with our onboard legal consultant. We have someone who specializes in exactly these kinds of situations. She can help you understand your rights and options. We can also help you contact your personal lawyer back home through the ship's communication systems, though I'd recommend doing that carefully in case your son has access to your email or phone records. The next 3 days were a special kind of hell. I had to maintain the appearance of enjoying my vacation, smiling at fellow passengers, attending dinners and excursions, all while my world crumbled behind the scenes. The ship's legal consultant, a sharp woman named Rebecca Chen, spent hours with me reviewing the power of attorney documents and explaining the nightmare I'd signed myself into. The good news, she said on the second day, is that this can be challenged and likely revoked, especially since you were clearly deceived about what you were signing. The bad news is that process takes time, and in the interim, your son technically has legal access to your assets. Can I just call my bank and tell them it's fraud? You can, and we should. But because you did technically sign these documents, It's not clear-cut fraud in the legal sense. It's more like fraud through misrepresentation, which is murkier. Your bank can freeze your accounts pending investigation, but that means you won't have access either. And if your son has already moved money or taken actions, reversing those could be complicated. I thought I might be sick. What actions could he have taken in just a few days? Rebecca's expression told me I wasn't going to like the answer. With durable power of attorney, he could sell property, access safety deposit boxes, make medical decisions on your behalf, change beneficiaries on accounts, transfer assets, take out loans in your name. Mr. Morrison, this document essentially makes him you, legally speaking. But I didn't understand what I was signing. He lied to me. I believe you. The courts will likely believe you too, eventually. But eventually could be months or even years of legal battle, and in the meantime, significant damage could be done. On the third day, we docked in Sitka. I met with local police, who took my statement and assured me they'd coordinate with authorities in Vancouver and Toronto. I called my lawyer, Martin, from a private room Patricia had arranged for me. His reaction confirmed my worst fears. "William, I'm so sorry, but there's already been activity on your accounts," Martin said, his voice grave. "Your son contacted me 2 days ago, claiming you'd given him power of attorney and asking about accessing the trust Susan set up. I thought it was odd, but he had the documentation, so I told him I'd need to review everything carefully first. That seemed to anger him. A trust? What trust?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "William, did Susan not discuss this with you?" "Discuss what?" "Martin, I'm standing on a cruise ship in Alaska, having just discovered my son tried to rob me. Please, just tell me what you're talking about." "About 6 months ago, Susan came to see me alone. She wanted to set up an irrevocable trust, placing your house and a significant portion of your joint assets into protection. She was very specific about the terms. The trust is managed by me and 2 other trustees. Even with power of attorney, your son can't touch anything in that trust. Susan said she wanted to make sure you were protected if anything happened to her." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Susan had known. 6 months before her death, she'd known that Michael was a threat, and she'd taken steps to protect me. She hadn't told me because she knew I wouldn't believe her, knew I'd defend our son against any accusation. So she'd protected me in secret, setting up legal barriers that would only matter if the worst happened. "Martin, what exactly is in this trust?" "Your house, about 70% of your investment portfolio, and the life insurance payout. Essentially, everything you need to maintain your standard of living for the rest of your life. What's not in the trust is your day-to-day accounts, which is why your son was able to attempt that wire transfer and a few other liquid assets. But the big things, the important things, Susan made sure he can't touch them." I was crying now, openly weeping in this small room on a cruise ship. Susan had saved me from beyond the grave, protecting me when I'd been too blind and trusting to protect myself. Did she leave any explanation? Any letter? She did, actually. She left instructions that if anyone with power of attorney ever tried to access the trust, I was to give you a letter she'd written. "William, I'm looking at it right now. Do you want me to read it to you?" "Yes," I managed to say through my tears. "Please." I heard the rustle of paper, and then Martin's voice, reading my dead wife's words. "My dearest William, if you're hearing this, it means I was right about Michael, and I hate more than anything that I was right. I know you don't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe it either when I first started noticing the signs. The phone calls about money, the questions about our will, the way he'd calculate the value of our house, our possessions, looking at everything like it was already his. I hired a private investigator, and what they found broke my heart. Michael has debts you don't know about, bad investments, gambling losses. He's desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. I'm so sorry, my love. I'm sorry I have to leave you, and I'm sorry our son isn't who we thought he was. But I couldn't leave you defenseless. This trust will keep you safe. The house is yours for life, can't be sold without all trustees agreeing. The money is yours, managed carefully so it will last. Don't feel guilty about protecting yourself. Don't let him manipulate you the way he tried to manipulate me when I confronted him about his debts. I love you always. Stay strong, Susan. When Martin finished reading, I couldn't speak. I sat in that room, phone pressed to my ear, and cried for the wife who'd loved me enough to see clearly what I couldn't, who'd protected me even as she was dying. William? Martin's voice brought me back. Are you okay? No, I said honestly, but I will be. What do I need to do now? I'm already working with the authorities. The power of attorney document can be challenged and revoked. I'm filing emergency motions to freeze any activity under it until a judge can review. Your son is going to be served with legal papers very soon. But William, I need to warn you, this is going to get ugly. He's not going to just accept defeat. I understand. When I emerged from that room, Patricia was waiting with Rebecca. They'd arranged for me to be moved to a different cabin, one that wasn't registered under my original booking, in case Michael somehow had access to cruise ship manifests or passenger information. They'd also arranged for additional security, discreet but present, in case my son tried something desperate. There's one more thing, Patricia said gently. We've been monitoring your son's attempts to contact you. He's left 17 voicemail messages in the last 3 days, each one claiming there's a family emergency and begging you to call him immediately. What kind of emergency? That's the thing. Each message claims a different emergency. In one, he says your house is flooding. In another, that there's been a fire. In a third, that his wife is in the hospital. They're clearly fabricated attempts to get you to contact him so he can regain control of the situation. The manipulation was so transparent now that I wondered how I'd ever fallen for his act. But I knew the answer. I'd been grieving, vulnerable, desperate to believe that I still had family who loved me. Michael had exploited that vulnerability with surgical precision. The rest of the cruise passed in a surreal haze. I went through the motions of being a tourist, seeing sights Susan had dreamed of, all while coordinating with lawyers and police from satellite phones and ship communication systems. Other passengers thought I was the lucky widower honoring his late wife's dreams. They had no idea I was simultaneously dismantling my son's attempt to steal my life savings. When we finally docked back in Victoria, 14 days after departure, there were 2 police officers waiting for me at the gangway. They weren't there to arrest me. They were there to escort me safely home and to inform me that Michael had been arrested in Toronto, attempting to use the power of attorney to access Susan's safety deposit box at our bank. He's claiming it's all a misunderstanding, one of the officers told me during the drive back to Vancouver. Says you authorized everything, that you're getting old and confused, that he was just trying to help manage your affairs. I have the cruise documentation proving otherwise, I said. I have witnesses who saw him deceive me. I have his own attempted fraud as evidence. We know, Mr. Morrison, the Crown Attorney is very confident in the case. Your son is going to face serious charges. The trial took 8 months. In that time, I learned things about Michael that broke my heart over and over again. The gambling addiction that had cost him his house. The business ventures that had failed. The credit card debt that exceeded $200,000. The 2 previous attempts to defraud elderly clients at his financial advisory firm. Incidents that had been quietly settled to avoid prosecution. My son was a con artist, and I'd been his mark. His lawyer tried every angle. I was senile and confused. I'd willingly given him power of attorney, and now regretted it. Susan's trust was evidence of my declining mental capacity, proof that I needed someone to manage my affairs. But the prosecution had the cruise ship witnesses, the recorded attempts at fraud, the timeline showing how he'd manipulated me in my most vulnerable moment. The most painful moment came when I had to testify. Michael sat at the defense table in a suit that looked too expensive for someone claiming financial hardship. And for just a second, I saw my little boy, the child Susan and I had raised with love and hope. Then I remembered the 16 other victims his lawyers had discovered, all elderly clients he'd defrauded over the past 5 years, and I knew I had to speak truth. Did your son tell you what you were signing? The prosecutor asked. He told me it was cruise documentation, I said clearly. He lied to me. Did you intend to give him control over your finances? No, never. What would your wife have wanted you to do in this situation? I looked at Michael then, saw him looking down at the table, unable to meet my eyes. My wife saw who he really was before I did. She protected me because she knew he'd try exactly what he did try. She'd want me to hold him accountable. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Fraud, theft over $5,000, exploitation of a vulnerable person, forgery, and a half-dozen other charges. The judge sentenced him to 6 years in prison, calling it a betrayal of the most fundamental kind, and noting that the defendant showed no remorse, only frustration at being caught. I didn't attend the sentencing. I'd said everything I needed to say during the trial. Instead, I sat in my living room, the house Susan had protected for me, and read her letter again. She'd ended it with a postscript I hadn't fully absorbed the first time. Don't blame yourself for trusting him. He's our son, and we raised him with love. What he became was his choice, not our failure. You're allowed to grieve both me and the son we thought we had. That's what I tell people now when they ask about it. The story made news, became a cautionary tale about elder fraud and family betrayal. People want to know how I'm doing, if I've forgiven Michael, if I regret having children. The answers are complicated. I'm surviving, taking it one day at a time. I haven't forgiven him. Not yet, maybe not ever. And I don't regret the years when he was the son I believed him to be, even if that son turned out to be a carefully constructed fiction. What I've learned is that Susan's warning wasn't paranoia. It was love. The deepest kind of love. The kind that sees clearly even when it hurts. The kind that protects even when it's easier to look away. She saved my home, yes, but more than that, she saved my future, my independence, my dignity. She gave me the chance to grow old on my own terms, in my own house, with my memories of her intact and untainted by financial ruin. I finally took that photo of Mendenhall Glacier out of storage last month, had it framed, and hung in my living room. When people ask about it, I tell them it's from the cruise my late wife planned for me, a final gift that turned out to be more complicated than either of us expected. I don't tell them everything. Some stories are too painful for casual conversation. But I'll tell you this, trust the warnings, even the ones that seem impossible, especially the ones from people who love you enough to protect you from the truth they wish wasn't true. Susan tried to tell me in her final moments, tried to cut through the morphine haze to save me one last time. I didn't listen then, but I'm listening now. And because of her foresight, her courage, her unwavering love, I'm still here, still standing, still able to honor her memory in the house we built together. Michael writes me letters from prison sometimes. They're full of apologies and explanations, promises to repay me and make things right. I don't respond. I don't know if I ever will. That's a choice I'm allowed to make, because Susan made sure I'd have the freedom to choose. In protecting my assets, she protected my agency, my right to decide who deserves my forgiveness and who doesn't. The cruise ship, that same line I sailed on, sent me a letter last month. Patricia, the cruise director who'd helped me, was retiring, and she wanted me to know how much my case had changed their policies. They now train all staff to watch for signs of elder fraud, to question suspicious documentation, to protect vulnerable passengers. She included a note that said, "You helped save others by having the courage to come forward. Your wife would be proud." I think she would be. I think she'd be proud that I finally saw Michael clearly, that I held him accountable, that I didn't let guilt or family obligation override justice. She'd be proud that I'm still here, still managing on my own, still making decisions about my life and my future. She protected me so I could keep living, and that's exactly what I'm doing. Sometimes, late at night, I sit on my porch overlooking the yard Susan loved, and I talk to her like she's still here. I tell her about my day, about the garden I'm trying to maintain, about the support group for fraud victims I joined where I met others who'd been betrayed by their own children. I tell her she was right and I was wrong, and I'm sorry I didn't listen sooner. I tell her I love her, and I miss her, and I'm grateful every single day for the trust she set up, for the letter she left, for the love that saw past my blindness to what needed to be done. And sometimes, when the wind rustles the trees just right, I can almost hear her voice telling me it's okay, that I'm going to be okay, that she's still watching over me even now. Maybe that's just grief talking, or wishful thinking, or the desperate hope of a lonely old man. But I choose to believe it's real. That love that's strong doesn't end with death. That Susan found a way to keep protecting me even from the grave. My daughter paid for my wedding trip. A guest pulled me aside and said something that saved my home. That's how the story goes when people want the short version. But the real story is longer, more painful, more complex. It's a story about a wife who loved her husband enough to see danger he couldn't see, about a son who became a stranger, about the difference between the family you think you have and the family you really have. It's a story about survival and grief and the power of legal preparation when love alone isn't enough. I was wrong about Michael, but Susan was right, and she made sure I'd survive my mistake. That's the legacy she left me, more valuable than any amount of money. She gave me the truth, even when I didn't want it, and the tools to protect myself when that truth became undeniable. For that, for her, for the life she made sure I'd still have, I'll spend every remaining day I have being grateful. And I'll spend them listening, really listening, to the warnings that love whispers, even when they come from beyond the grave.